My name is Johanna, and I'm going to be talking about black codes within North Carolina. So, basically, what were black codes? Well, black codes were made in order to kind of limit African Americans. But why would they want to limit African Americans? They're considered people, right? Well, it all begins when the question of slavery. Slavery was a time where it was a very sad and very demeaning part of American history. When it came to many African Americans basically being slaves and basically succumbing to many types of forms of abuse, death, and even sexual abuse when it came to various women slaves. Many African Americans during this time were also limited, in which it was called 17th century slave codes, which were kind of ways in which many plantation slave owners would use in order to maintain slavery, and which would include various ways. Many slaves were not given the right to read and write, or even host many types of ways of forming group gatherings, or even playing cards, or even kind of talking to other slaves. And it was due to many different kinds of forms of resistance and kinds of revolts that many African American slaves were taking part in. Anytime any type of revolt or resistance would go on, many African Americans or plantation owners would add some sort of code, and it was kind of like a law for many African Americans when it came to their limitations in order to maintain slavery. Well, why would many plantation owners even need slaves? The growing need for cotton. Many African Americans were used as manual laborers when it came to plantation owners needing some type of way of maintaining their crops. So slaves were a way. It was sort of cheap, and it was sort of a way of maintaining their gardens without needing to hire people and needing to maintain it themselves. Plantation owners were very much afraid that slavery would end, and which would lead the questioning of the Union and their motives. Many people think that the South was mostly engaging in slavery, but it was also the North as well. It's kind of like a misconception about slavery. The Union was very much against slavery, and it was kind of like the South was more like, we need slavery. It's basically all we need for our economy and to basically sustain us. So then came the 1860 election, which would soon elect President Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was kind of a guy that was basically about the Constitution. He was all about the Constitution and about everyone having equal rights and opportunities. But I wouldn't say that he was the most pro-African American. Abraham Lincoln was very much the cause of which would lead to the South seceding the Union. The South was kind of afraid that he would end slavery, which he sort of did. So soon the South would kind of secede the Union and rebel against it. And it would soon lead to the start of the Civil War of 1861, which was kind of a form of battles and a bunch of people dying and a bunch of different talks in which it would lead to the demise of the South and the victory of the Union. Since the Union won, that means slavery's gonna end, right? Well, sort of. Soon Abraham Lincoln would start the Emancipation Proclamation, which would free all slaves. But not all slaves were free with that document. Not a whole lot of states got word of this. It was sort of like, oh yeah, this is happening, but other people didn't get wind of this. So Texas was the last state in order to end slavery once and for all. So, in which many slaves were free, so that would be the date of June 19th, which would soon form the federal holiday of Juneteenth that we still celebrate today on a national level. And also the 13th Amendment that would abolish slavery once and for all. But what about the South? The South is part of the country, right? Well, it was kind of like a heated debate over that. They did leave the Union. They kind of rebelled. They kind of fought the country. So many radical Republicans were very much against many people, or very much the South, coming back. They were kind of like, oh yeah, they can't run anything because I mean, they left the country. They kind of were like, bye guys. And we're kind of like, oh yeah, like, I don't really want to be here anymore. Let's just go against y'all. And they were kind of like, oh yeah, you can't come back. I'm sorry, but you can't be fake like that. We don't really trust you, babes. So obviously the South was on their knees. They were kind of like, oh, like we need to come back. Like we don't have anything without slavery. We kind of need the Union in order to survive out here because it's rough out here. So the South was soon, especially in North Carolina, many people would kind of give President Johnson letters called amnesty letters. And it was basically like, oh, I'm sorry. I understand I took action for what I did. And it was basically to not be punished for what they did. Radical Republicans were very much pro punishing them and kind of limiting them when it came to their rights. So many southern states would soon be granted their right back into the Union, and we're kind of like a hip hip hooray. But what are we supposed to do now? I mean, without slavery, what is going to happen? I mean, we don't have slaves. We don't have any type of money. I mean, slavery was basically ways of like kind of maintaining ourselves in livelihood. So, what are we supposed to do? So, they went back to their old ways, but in a much strategic way. Soon, they were kind of like, oh, we don't got nothing. We don't got nothing without slavery. So let's find a loophole in which we can kind of maintain that. So soon they would start black codes. Black codes were ways of kind of limiting African Americans when it came to their rights. And it regarded to many emancipated African Americans and many newly freed African Americans. It was kind of limitations when it came to interracial marriages, their right to vote, their right to testify against white persons, their right to ownership of land, and kind of keeping them within where they were supposed to be and kind of their labor rights. African Americans were very much still oppressed. So, I mean, this was kind of their way of being like, oh, yeah, this is our modern form of slavery. We're going to get these people right where we want them, and we're going to make sure that we still have some type of slavery in order to maintain these fields. But it would not very much last very long. I mean, you have people that were able to kind of have their rights, so I mean, they're not going to like let this go down easy. So very much, the North was very much against it, and many black oppositioners were very much against it as well. So soon they would end all of this and soon kind of claim it as very much unconstitutional. So it would soon lead to the presidential Reconstruction. Basically, Reconstruction was very much a time of promising when it came to African Americans because, I mean, you're now free. You can basically do whatever you want. Like, you've been oppressed for how long, and now you can pretty much end it all. Like, public office. Would you like something in order to capture every memory that you have of your past life? Very much. Or would you like something that would be able to capture every memory that you can of your family? Well, I got something very much good for you, and that would be the picture camera. It is able to construct many different pictures and many different photos and different poses that you and your family could pose in. It is locally made, and it is all over every store in all of the South. If you would like to stop by, you can stop by anywhere and go grab you one at a very low price and at any place near you. Make these kind of cartoons to kind of embarrass African Americans when it came to them, and soon create very much different images of African Americans to kind of get them out of public offices and kind of make them seem like they didn't know what they were doing. And it was kind of a way to kind of overthrow them when it came to public offices. I mean, if people saw that African Americans were kind of making an embarrassment out of them, why would you want to elect an embarrassment to public office? I mean, we still go through that now, and it's kind of surprising that it still happens today. So, I mean, African Americans were very much disenfranchised when it came to white supremacy. So, African Americans, soon it would lead to the end of Reconstruction. When it came to the end of Reconstruction, this is where stuff started going very much downhill, like very much downhill. Downhill to the point where African Americans were very much oppressed. African Americans obviously were very much oppressed when it came to slavery, but this would soon come back to when Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws was kind of like a modern day form of black codes when it came to limitations. It was like separate, which came to the ideology of separate but equal. So basically, Jim Crow laws were very much limitations when it came to their right to vote, when it came to literacy tests, and different types of poll taxes, and a lot of different white people being at poll stations and kind of trying to intimidate black voters. It was just basically like, okay, y'all can't be doing this. And so then segregation of public places like schools, restaurants, bus transportation systems. It was just a mess. It was a pure mess. I mean, we went backwards. I mean, African Americans were supposed to be up and coming, not down and coming. So, very much African Americans were going through a lot. I mean, very much they were still dying. African Americans were still being discriminated against. I mean, white people, obviously the Ku Klux Klan came up and coming, and I mean, they weren't the most happiest people about African Americans being around. So, I mean, African Americans were second class citizens when it came to their rights. But it was time for this to stop. Obviously, we have a guy named Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. was kind of a guy that was kind of like, oh yeah, this is gonna end. I mean, we can't be having these people up in here acting a fool. We can't be having people becoming kind of like a laughing stock. We can't have anything to happen to it. We can't continue to live like this. I mean, this is kind of bad. And we're going back in history. So it would soon lead to stuff like this.
The Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty.
This guy was not coming to play. He was very much active when it came to civil rights. But I mean, there were many other people besides him that were doing something. We have many different types of forms of protest when it came to the living horrors of practically just being discrimination in Jim Crow. So, I mean, many people would form different types of protests when it came to sit-in protests, different types of marching protests, and different types of resistance when it came to segregation. So these various types of ways very much aided in the civil rights movement. Ensued the passing of the civil rights movement in 1964 would allow for desegregation and different types of liberties when it came to African Americans and no longer being oppressed. That was very much the legacy of Black Codes. I mean, if Black Codes did not happen, maybe very much Reconstruction, if Black Codes had continued and the end of Reconstruction had not happened, maybe Jim Crow would never happened. That is a legacy of Black Codes. I mean, slave codes started, and then Black Codes started, and then Jim Crow laws started. It was basically put in place for African Americans to stay where they are in society and basically be inferior when it comes to their race, when it comes to the race of mankind. We still very much see Black Codes when it comes to police brutality and many African Americans being killed and beaten. Like very much many people find very find African Americans to be aggressive and kind of a threat to society, in which many African Americans lose their lives because of it. Many African Americans just still live oppressed today, and it is very sad that still today black codes and many type of limitations to African Americans based on their race is still happening today, because it should have ended a long time ago, especially in North Carolina. I mean, this is the root of where it all happened. But I just would like to say thank you so much all for listening, and I hope you all enjoyed listening to this podcast about black codes in North Carolina.